How overthinking is keeping you to go forward and suced. There's a war you can't see, but you feel it every single day. It begins the moment you wake up, before your feet even touch the ground. 1,000 thoughts march in formation, each one pulling you in a different direction, each one whispering what might go wrong if you move too soon. It's not chaos by accident. It's the mind's most sophisticated defense mechanism, disguised as caution, disguised as logic, disguised as preparation.
You think you're thinking, but what you're really doing is negotiating with fear. Overthinking isn't an excess of intelligence. It's intelligence trapped in survival mode. Your brain's primal circuits were designed to predict danger, not happiness. It tries to protect you from the unknown, from rejection, from failure. And in doing so, it slowly kills the very part of you that was born to explore. Every hesitation you justify as thinking it through is often a form of internal resistance. The mind tells stories that sound rational. I'll start when I'm ready. I'll act when I have more clarity. But clarity never comes to those who wait for certainty. It only comes to those who move despite confusion. Andrew Huberman describes how the brain uses energy to scan for threats more than opportunities. It's a survival bias deeply wired into your nervous system. That's why overthinking feels safer than acting, because your brain confuses motion with danger. The more you imagine what could go wrong, the more cortisol your body releases, locking you in a physiological loop of tension and hesitation. It's not that you lack discipline. It's that your body has learned to equate stillness with safety. Jordan B. Peterson would call this the tragedy of the unstructured mind, a consciousness that turns inward against itself. The thinker becomes both the soldier and the battlefield. You analyze every decision until it bleeds meaning. You question every path until even progress feels threatening. And yet, beneath the noise, there's a quiet part of you that remembers movement, that remembers what it felt like to trust your instincts before they were buried under layers of logic. René Descartes believed clarity was born from doubt, but not the kind of doubt that paralyzes. He sought the kind that refines truth, the disciplined questioning that leads to structure. Your mind, however, has forgotten that balance. It doubts everything, even its own ability to choose. It dissects feelings as if emotion were a flaw rather than a form of intelligence. You stand still not because you lack awareness, but because you've mistaken thought for truth and fear for wisdom. Overthinking convinces you that you're being responsible, when in reality, you're avoiding life's uncertainty. It whispers, "Wait until you understand," while life itself is screaming, "Move and you'll understand." Every thought feels like armor, but it's really a cage, one built from memories of failure and the illusion of control. You rehearse your pain to prevent it, not realizing that in the process, you're reliving it daily. The silent war inside your mind is not won through more thinking. It's won through presence, through reclaiming authority over your attention, deciding where your energy goes instead of letting it be hijacked by endless mental simulations. The moment you notice the loop and take a single step despite fear, you break the spell. You prove to your nervous system that not all uncertainty is danger. Some of it is freedom. And that's the paradox. Peace doesn't come from quieting every thought, but from realizing you don't have to obey them. Overthinking is not the voice of wisdom. It's the echo of fear disguised as logic. The war ends the moment you choose to act without perfect understanding. Because progress has never required certainty, only courage. When intelligence turns against you. The greatest trap of an intelligent mind is believing that understanding equals control. You've learned to see patterns, to anticipate outcomes, to predict how things could unfold. It feels powerful, until it becomes poison. Because somewhere along the line, your intelligence stopped serving you and started serving your fears. What was once your strength became your disguise, a mask of logic hiding the paralysis of doubt. You don't lack clarity. You drown in it. You don't lack capacity. You've weaponized it against yourself. Highly self-aware people often mistake overanalysis for depth. You dissect emotions instead of experiencing them, intellectualize pain instead of healing it, rationalize inaction as caution. It feels noble, responsible, mature. But in truth, it's the ego's most elegant defense, using brilliance to avoid vulnerability. You think too far ahead, not realizing that your vision of the future is just an extension of your anxiety projected onto possibility. You're not predicting outcomes. You're building prisons made of probabilities. Psychologists call this analysis paralysis, when excessive reflection overrides decision-making. Your brain, overwhelmed by infinite options, shuts down the circuitry responsible for commitment. According to cognitive neuroscience, each time you revisit the same decision without acting, the prefrontal cortex weakens its signal to execute. The mind loops endlessly, addicted to thinking because thinking feels safer than failing. But that safety is an illusion. It's not protecting you, it's sedating you. Jordan Peterson once said that true intelligence isn't about avoiding mistakes, but learning to carry the consequences of them. The problem is that the overthinker believes mistakes are fatal, that one wrong move will unravel everything. So instead of building resilience, they build excuses. Instead of embracing the uncertainty that makes growth possible, they build theories about why now isn't the right time. The intellect, once a tool for creation, becomes an engineer of stagnation. René Descartes pursued rational clarity, but even he warned that doubt must lead somewhere. It must be a bridge, not a home. The modern mind has forgotten that. We have turned doubt into identity. We confuse the endless questioning of reality with intelligence, when in truth it's a symptom of fear. The most brilliant minds often live the most fragile lives because they can explain everything yet act on nothing. Knowledge becomes armor so thick that life itself can't reach through. Andrew Huberman explains that cognitive overload doesn't only affect emotion, it physically limits energy. The more data the brain processes without direction, the more glucose it burns, leading to fatigue, irritability, and emotional depletion. You think you're mentally preparing for the perfect moment, but you're draining the very resources that would make action possible. Your brilliance becomes a burden, your self-awareness a spiral. The tragedy of intelligence is not that it thinks too much. It's that it forgets when to stop thinking. True wisdom is knowing where to place the limit. The mind that constantly analyzes never learns to trust its own conclusions. And without trust, even the most beautiful ideas die unborn. You weren't made to solve every variable. You were made to participate in the mystery. The overactive intellect mistakes the map for the journey, the theory for the experience, the question for the answer. To move forward, intelligence must return to humility, to the recognition that not everything can be understood before it's lived. That's the turning point where logic surrenders to life. Because the moment your intelligence serves your fear, it stops being intelligence at all. It becomes hesitation disguised as wisdom. The dopamine trap of endless reflection. Every time you replay the same thought, your brain rewards you. It releases a small pulse of dopamine, the same chemical responsible for pleasure, motivation, and reward. It feels like progress, like movement, like you're solving something important. But you're not. You're just getting high on mental rehearsal. Overthinking becomes a drug, and your mind becomes the dealer. The rush of analysis replaces the satisfaction of action. You keep thinking not because you're learning, but because your brain has learned to enjoy the illusion of control. Andrew Huberman explains that dopamine is not the chemical of achievement, but of pursuit. It fuels the chase, not the catch. When you think about acting, plan, imagine, or predict, your brain releases dopamine as if you were already doing it. You feel momentary relief, a surge of energy, a false sense of progress. But as soon as the thought ends, the reward drops. You crave it again. So, you think again. That's how overthinking becomes self-sustaining, a neurological feedback loop between anticipation and paralysis. This is why people who overthink often confuse activity with productivity. They spend hours organizing ideas, mapping strategies, planning routines, yet accomplish nothing tangible. The brain mistakes the noise of motion for meaning. Like scrolling through possibilities on an endless feed, you feel busy but go nowhere. The system that evolved to help you hunt for food now hunts for certainty, and the more you chase it, the hungrier you get. Joe Dispenza's research on neuroplasticity shows that repeated thought patterns physically wire the brain. The more you indulge in analysis without action, the more you strengthen the neural circuits of hesitation. Over time, you're not just overthinking, you're becoming an overthinker. Your brain normalizes mental chaos as comfort, and the unfamiliar silence of decision feels like danger. The mind, trained by its own chemical rhythm, mistakes stillness for loss. This is the hidden addiction of modern consciousness, addicted to stimulation, allergic to simplicity. You've been conditioned to believe that constant mental engagement is the same as awareness. But true awareness is not noise, it's depth. The dopamine trap keeps you circling on the surface of your thoughts, never diving deep enough to find clarity. You crave another insight, another angle, another what if, until your intellect becomes restless, your body tense, your heart distant from the moment. Descartes sought knowledge through methodical doubt, but even his process required an endpoint, a moment of decision where thought gives birth to certainty. Modern minds rarely reach that point. We've built lives that reward thinking indefinitely. Endless notifications, infinite choices, constant comparison. The result is a culture that worships intellect, but forgets to live. You feel intelligent for analyzing your hesitation, but every loop of reflection widens the distance between your potential and your reality. The dopamine loop doesn't want you to move, it wants you to anticipate movement. The cure isn't to think less, but to reclaim your reward system. To teach your brain that satisfaction comes from experience, not prediction. Each time you act despite uncertainty, you break the chemical cycle of delay. You teach your nervous system that real progress feels different, quieter, steadier, grounded. Freedom begins when the high of reflection loses its power, when you stop chasing the illusion of clarity and start trusting the rhythm of action. When dopamine returns to its rightful purpose, not fueling fear disguised as logic, but driving the courage to live. The illusion of control. You've been taught that control is safety, that if you can predict every outcome, calculate every possibility, and prepare for every failure, you'll never get hurt. But that belief is the very thing suffocating your potential. Overthinking isn't the pursuit of control. It's the fear of surrender disguised as intelligence. You call it preparation, but what you're really doing is trying to negotiate with chaos. You want life to guarantee certainty before you take a step, and life refuses. The human brain was not designed for control, it was designed for adaptation. Neuroscience shows that the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that plans and organizes, depends on the limbic system, which governs emotion and intuition. The more you try to suppress uncertainty, the more you activate your body's stress response. Cortisol floods your bloodstream, narrowing your focus and making creative thought impossible. In chasing control, you lose clarity. The tighter you hold on, the less you see. Andrew Huberman explains that when we attempt to mentally simulate every possible scenario, our nervous system can't distinguish imagination from reality. The body reacts as though the danger were happening now. That's why overthinkers live in a constant state of low-grade anxiety. The war is imaginary, but the damage is real. Elevated heart rate, shallow breathing, muscle tension, exhaustion. You're not preparing for life. You're rehearsing stress. René Descartes believed that doubt should lead to knowledge, but the modern mind has transformed doubt into fear. It's not curiosity that drives your thinking. It's the obsession with control. You measure every word, every risk, every emotion as though precision could protect you from pain. But life doesn't reward precision. It rewards presence. The moment you seek to master everything, You lose the ability to experience anything. Jordan B. Peterson would call this the collapse of order into chaos, when the mind, in its attempt to dominate uncertainty, becomes enslaved by it. You plan conversations that never happen, replay mistakes that no longer exist, and project futures that will never come. You call this awareness, but it's just the intellect refusing to trust reality. Control, in this context, isn't power, it's paralysis. Psychology teaches that true control is paradoxical. The only way to regain it is to release it. When you stop resisting the unknown, your nervous system shifts from defense to openness. That's when clarity returns, when energy once used for worrying is freed for action. You realize that control was never meant to be external. It was meant to be internal. You can't command circumstances, but you can govern your response. The Stoics understood this long before neuroscience. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." The modern translation, "You can't control the storm, but you can control the sail." Overthinking is the sailor who refuses to leave the harbor until the sea is perfectly calm. But calm seas don't make skillful sailors. The ocean of life doesn't reward those who wait, it rewards those who adapt. The illusion of control dissolves the moment you act. Action shatters the mind's projections and forces the body into reality. Once you're in motion, fear loses its language. The unknown becomes the teacher, not the threat. That's where peace lives, not in the plan, but in the movement. The more you release, the more life unfolds. Control was never the goal, clarity was. And clarity only comes when you stop trying to manipulate what was never yours to command. The weight of unlived possibilities. There is a unique kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from doing too much, but from living too little inside your own mind. Overthinkers carry invisible weight. The burden of every path not taken, every conversation replayed, every version of life that exists only in imagination. Each what if becomes a ghost, haunting the present with the echoes of unrealized potential. You feel heavy not because the world demands too much of you, but because your thoughts never let you rest. Your brain was built to imagine futures, to simulate outcomes so that you could survive. But somewhere along the line, imagination stopped being a tool and became a trap. Neuroscience shows that when you imagine possibilities vividly, your brain releases the same neurochemicals as if those events were real. Every scenario you create, success, failure, loss, is stored in your nervous system as experience. You're living multiple lives at once, and none of them are actually happening. The result is fatigue, confusion, and the quiet grief of unlived reality. Jordan Peterson often speaks about potential as a moral responsibility, the unused part of you that demands expression. Yet overthinking paralyzes that expression. You analyze paths so thoroughly that every direction starts to look dangerous. You begin to associate movement with regret and stillness with safety. But the truth is the opposite. Regret only grows in silence. It feeds on what you didn't say, didn't try, didn't risk. The cost of overthinking isn't failure. It's the slow erosion of what might have been. Descartes sought clarity through reason, but reason without action becomes cruelty toward the self. When you think endlessly about how life could be different, you stretch your identity between countless timelines until you no longer know which one is yours. The mind that tries to live every possibility ends up living none. You lose the present moment in the chaos of speculation. You build castles in thought while your real life quietly decays in the background. Andrew Huberman explains that mental fatigue is not only emotional, it's biochemical. Each repeated thought triggers the same neural networks, consuming energy without resolution. Your body grows tired because your mind refuses to land. Like an aircraft trapped in perpetual holding patterns, you circle over your life waiting for perfect conditions to descend, unaware that fuel is running out. The exhaustion you feel isn't just mental, it's the physical weight of unmade decisions. Philosophically, this is the tragedy of potential. Aristotle believed that everything living holds an inherent purpose, a movement from possibility toward actuality. When that motion is interrupted by fear, the soul stagnates. You sense it, the quiet guilt that comes from knowing you could be more, yet watching yourself hesitate. It's not laziness, it's the fear of choosing wrong. But not choosing at all is the only guaranteed loss. The weight of unlived possibilities doesn't fade with time, it grows. Every moment you delay expression, imagination compounds the pressure. You think you're preserving freedom by keeping your options open, but you're actually suffocating it. Freedom isn't infinite choice. It's commitment to one direction. Only through action does potential transform into meaning. The mind, left unanchored, drifts endlessly through what-ifs. The heart, once courageous, grows silent beneath their noise. Release doesn't come from thinking less, but from allowing one possibility to become real, even imperfectly. Because once you step into the present, every other imagined life ceases to weigh you down. You don't need to live all versions of your future. You only need to live one fully. And that's how you lighten the load, not by silencing the dream, but by daring to live it. The inner critic and the myth of readiness. There's a voice that follows you everywhere, the one that questions every step, every decision, every moment of courage. It speaks with confidence, disguised as reason. You're not ready yet. You need more time. You'll start when it feels right. That voice is not wisdom. It's fear wearing a suit of logic. It convinces you that perfection must precede movement, that clarity must come before action. But readiness isn't something you find. It's something you build by moving. The inner critic was born from survival. Its purpose was once noble, to keep you from danger, to ensure acceptance, to help you belong. But in modern life, it has mutated into something destructive. It no longer protects you, it imprisons you. Psychology defines it as an internalized voice of authority, formed by the echoes of judgment, failure, and comparison. Each time you hesitate, that voice grows stronger, feeding on your uncertainty. It tells you that waiting is safer, but what it really means is that comfort has become more important than growth. Andrew Huberman explains that hesitation has a physical cost. Every time you resist taking action, your body produces a surge of stress hormones. Cortisol spikes, heart rate rises, the nervous system prepares for threat, but there is none. The threat is imagined. The energy meant for movement becomes trapped inside you, looping through cycles of self-doubt. You don't feel tired because you've done too much. You feel tired because you're suppressing what was meant to move. Jordan Peterson often warns that perfectionism is just fear rebranded as virtue. You call it high standards, but it's really paralysis. You tell yourself you're waiting for the perfect timing, but there is no such thing. Life never grants full certainty. The mind that waits to act until it feels completely prepared will wait forever. Readiness emerges in motion, not before it.
Confidence is not a prerequisite to action. It is its result. Descartes taught that doubt should serve clarity, but the overthinker uses doubt as an escape. You analyze every potential mistake, not to improve, but to delay. You mistake caution for mastery. The truth is, you're not afraid of failure. You're afraid of exposure. Afraid that taking a step will reveal that you're not yet who you wish to be.
But that's the entire point of growth. You act before you're ready so that you can become the person who is. Neuroscience shows that consistent small actions retrain the brain faster than overanalysis ever could. Each step forward rewires your neural pathways, lowering the brain's resistance to uncertainty. Over time, what once felt terrifying becomes natural. The inner critic loses volume when you start moving despite it. Its power thrives in silence, not in confrontation. Every decision made under pressure is a declaration that you trust your own evolution more than your comfort. The myth of readiness has destroyed more dreams than failure ever could. It promises safety in exchange for time, but time is the one thing you never get back.
You think you're protecting yourself from pain, but you're only trading temporary comfort for lifelong regret. The longer you wait, the harder it becomes to start, because hesitation becomes identity. The person who always plans eventually forgets how to begin. Freedom starts the moment you stop negotiating with the inner critic. You don't need its approval to act. You need to act to silence it. You were never meant to feel ready. You were meant to feel alive. Growth is messy, uncertain, uncomfortable by design. Readiness is not a state of mind. It's a consequence of courage. And courage doesn't ask for permission. It asks for movement. Emotional debt, the cost of thinking without feeling. Every time you analyze an emotion, instead of allowing yourself to feel it, you create a kind of psychological debt. You borrow temporary relief by suppressing discomfort, but the cost accumulates quietly in the background. Over time, that debt grows, in the form of anxiety, tension, fatigue, and emotional detachment. You tell yourself you're being strong, rational, composed. But what you're really doing is avoiding payment on what your heart is still owed. Emotional debt is what happens when intellect refuses to collaborate with emotion. You dissect feelings instead of experiencing them, as if understanding could replace healing. Cognitive behavioral therapy shows that emotions, when unprocessed, don't disappear. They linger in subconscious loops, influencing thought, behavior, and even body chemistry. You can't outthink what you haven't allowed yourself to feel. Each time you suppress an emotion, your nervous system still completes the stress cycle internally, releasing cortisol and adrenaline without resolution. The mind stays busy, the body stays burdened. Andrew Huberman explains that our physiological state defines our mental state more than the other way around. When your body is locked in chronic stress, the brain receives that as data. I am not safe. This creates the perfect storm for overthinking. You analyze your life, your purpose, your relationships. But the thoughts are not born from clarity. They're born from tension. You're not reflecting. You're reacting to an unprocessed emotion echoing through your nervous system. Thinking becomes a way to manage feelings you don't know how to hold. Joe Dispenza describes this as the body becoming addicted to familiar emotional states. If you constantly suppress anger, fear, or sadness, your brain begins to crave the chemicals those emotions release. You become chemically loyal to your suffering, returning to thoughts that recreate the same emotional pattern. That's why overthinkers often repeat the same worries. It's not habit, it's addiction. Your mind has learned to keep the emotion alive through repetition, even when it hurts. Descartes sought to separate mind from body to understand the mechanics of thought. But modern neuroscience proves the opposite. They're inseparable. Your body is not a vessel that carries your mind. It's a mirror reflecting everything your thoughts refuse to admit. The tension in your chest, the tightness in your stomach, the shallow breath before speaking. These are the unpaid debts of emotional avoidance. Thinking becomes easier than feeling, and so you choose the path of least resistance. Yet every unprocessed emotion remains stored as unfinished business within you, waiting to be acknowledged. Jordan Peterson often says that meaning is found in the integration of chaos. To confront what you feel is to reclaim power from the unconscious. The moment you allow emotion to complete its cycle, by crying, speaking, moving, breathing, you release the energy that overthinking was trying to manage. Clarity follows, not because the problem disappears, but because you're no longer fighting your own biology. You've paid the debt by feeling what you've avoided. True intelligence is emotional honesty, the courage to let the body and mind speak the same language. When you stop outsourcing healing to logic, your nervous system resets. Thoughts become lighter, focus sharper, and peace more sustainable. The more you feel, the less you need to think about feeling. That's not weakness, that's integration. Emotional debt isn't settled by more reasoning, it's settled by truth. The one you were too smart to face and now wise enough to feel. The noise that kills intuition. There was a time when you could sense things clearly, when instinct whispered before logic intervened. You could feel when something was right or wrong without needing to justify it. That natural clarity hasn't disappeared. It's just been drowned out by noise. Every overanalyzed thought, every internal debate, every anxious projection adds another layer of static between you and your intuition. What once was a compass has become a signal lost in interference. Intuition is not magic. It's memory refined by emotion. It's the brain's ability to process patterns so quickly that it feels like knowing without thinking. Neuroscience shows that intuition is the result of subconscious recognition, your brain comparing present experiences with stored memories of the past. But for intuition to work, the mind must be quiet enough to listen. Overthinking destroys that silence. It fills every moment with commentary, leaving no space for inner recognition to emerge. You can't hear wisdom over the noise of analysis. Andrew Huberman explains that the brain's attentional system has a limited bandwidth. When it's overloaded by constant thought, it loses the ability to detect subtle sensory or emotional signals. That's why overthinkers often describe feeling disconnected, not because they lack intuition, but because they've drowned it in mental noise. Every what if, every maybe, every I should have, acts like static interference on a frequency designed for truth. Aristotle called this phronesis, practical wisdom, the art of right action guided by perception and virtue. It's the balance between knowledge and instinct, reason and moral intuition. But when the analytical mind dominates, phronesis collapses. You start to doubt every impulse, question every feeling, mistrust every quiet sense of knowing. You rely so heavily on logic that you amputate the very sense that helps logic serve life. Descartes pursued truth through thought, Aristotle through harmony. One dissected reality, the other listened to it. Modern overthinkers often confuse the first for superiority, forgetting that wisdom begins where noise ends. Joe Dispenza describes intuition as the brain and heart achieving coherence, a measurable state where thoughts and emotions synchronize, producing clarity and calm. But coherence cannot exist in chaos. When you live in constant cognitive chatter, your heart rhythm loses stability, your breathing shallows, and your body perceives life as a threat. Intuition dies not because it's gone, but because the environment inside you has become too loud for it to speak. Jordan Peterson often points out that meaning arises from alignment, when what you know, what you feel, and what you do are no longer in conflict. Intuition is the bridge between those three forces. It's not the enemy of reason, it's its silent partner. Overthinking cuts that bridge, replacing understanding with hesitation. You stop feeling and start calculating, forgetting that the most important decisions in life are not made by perfect logic, but by quiet conviction. The noise of overthinking is seductive because it feels productive. It gives you the illusion of awareness while disconnecting you from truth. The more you analyze, the less you trust your own sense of direction. But intuition doesn't need more information. It needs less interference. It thrives in the space after breath, in the pause before reaction, in the stillness after release. That's where clarity lives. In the silence, your thoughts are too afraid to enter. To hear your intuition again, you must practice subtraction. Remove the unnecessary, simplify the internal dialogue, breathe until thought loses urgency. The quieter your mind becomes, the more clearly it speaks. Intuition is not a rare gift. It's a forgotten language, and you'll remember it the moment you stop shouting over its voice. The present moment as a lost skill. We live in an age where presence has become an endangered state. The mind is everywhere except here, trapped between memories that ache and futures that never arrive. You check your phone while thinking of tomorrow, replay conversations from yesterday, plan the next step before you've taken the current one. Overthinking has stolen your ability to inhabit reality. You exist, but you rarely are. Presence isn't just a spiritual idea, it's a neurological skill. Andrew Huberman explains that focus is regulated by specific neural circuits that require both rest and rhythm. But constant thought overstimulates those circuits, fragmenting attention. The more you think about being present, the less present you become. Attention, once lost to hyperanalysis, doesn't return through effort, but through stillness. Through teaching your brain to stop sprinting toward control and start walking toward awareness. Descartes taught that the act of thinking proved existence. I think, therefore I am. But if he lived today, surrounded by endless distraction, he might have discovered its reversal. I think too much, therefore I am not. Because overthinking disconnects consciousness from experience. The more you try to capture life through thought, the further you drift from living it. True presence doesn't require intellect. It requires surrender, the courage to trust that what's happening now is enough. Jordan Peterson often reminds us that chaos hides in the future and suffering hides in the past. Presence is the meeting point where neither can reach you. It's not passive or mystical. It's disciplined engagement with what's in front of you. When you're fully in the present, anxiety loses oxygen, because it cannot exist without time. The mind, conditioned to predict or regret, begins to calm when anchored in what is. The body follows, rebalancing hormones, lowering cortisol, and reactivating the parasympathetic system that restores peace. Joe Dispenza explains that your body memorizes emotional states. When you dwell on the past, your physiology replays it. When you fear the future, your body rehearses it. Presence interrupts that loop. It reclaims energy wasted on mental simulations and returns it to awareness. That's why moments of genuine presence, deep breath, slow observation, quiet thought, feel powerful. They are the only times your mind and body operate in the same timeline. Aristotle believed that happiness, or eudaimonia, wasn't an emotion, but a rhythm. Living in alignment with your purpose in each moment. Presence isn't about doing nothing. It's about doing one thing with everything you are. It's the opposite of multitasking, the antidote to mental fragmentation. Overthinkers mistake complexity for depth, but presence reveals that simplicity is the highest form of intelligence. The loss of presence is the loss of intimacy with life. You no longer see details, only abstractions, not a sunset, but a reminder of your schedule. Not a conversation, but an opportunity to say the right thing. You analyze reality until it stops feeling real. Yet the cure is beautifully simple. Awareness without interpretation. To see without labeling. To feel without measuring. To exist without justification. Presence is not achieved, it's remembered. It's what you were before thought became constant. It's the space between stimulus and response where freedom lives. The mind can travel endlessly through time, but the soul only breathes in now. To reclaim presence is to reclaim yourself. The part of you untouched by the noise of what was or what might be. Thinking less, seeing more. The solution to overthinking isn't to stop thinking altogether. It's to think with purpose and see with clarity. When you think less, you don't lose intelligence. You recover perception. You start noticing what has always been there, but was hidden behind layers of noise. The mind that constantly analyzes sees only fragments. The quiet mind sees patterns. This is the paradox. By doing less mentally, you perceive more completely. Cognitive behavioral therapy teaches that thoughts are not facts. They are hypotheses awaiting evidence. Yet overthinkers treat every thought as truth, every doubt as data. The mind becomes a courtroom where emotion is on trial, and logic plays both judge and executioner. But wisdom isn't born in judgment, it's born in observation. The ability to see without immediately interpreting is what separates clarity from confusion. Thinking less doesn't mean disengaging from reality. It means engaging with it directly, without distortion. Andrew Huberman explains that when your focus narrows under stress, your brain's visual and cognitive systems constrict. You literally see less of the world when trapped in worry. Expanding your visual field, lifting your gaze, softening your focus, signals safety to the nervous system and restores balance between the analytical and intuitive brain. Physiologically, this is what thinking less means, shifting from mental control to sensory presence. When the body feels safe, the mind calms. When the mind calms, perception expands. Jordan Peterson often notes that meaning arises when perception aligns with truth. The more you cling to control, the more you distort what's real. Overthinking filters experience through fear, projecting outcomes instead of observing facts. You stop seeing people for who they are and start seeing them as reflections of your own anxieties. The world becomes a mirror of your mental state, not your environment. Thinking less breaks that cycle. It turns the mirror back into a window. Joe Dispenza reminds us that neuroplasticity allows the brain to reshape itself through new patterns of awareness. Each time you interrupt analysis and return to observation, through breath, stillness, or focus, you're rewiring the circuitry of perception. You teach your brain that clarity is found not in over-control, but in surrender. You start realizing that life reveals itself when you stop demanding that it make immediate sense. The Stoics understood this centuries ago. Epictetus said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you interpret it." Thinking less doesn't mean caring less. It means removing unnecessary interpretation so truth can speak for itself. When you stop forcing meaning, meaning emerges naturally. When you stop rehearsing life, you start living it. Seeing more isn't about the eyes, it's about awareness unobstructed by fear. Descartes believed clarity was the foundation of knowledge, yet even he admitted that the mind must first be still to recognize truth. In today's world, stillness is the rarest form of intelligence. The one who can think deeply but not obsessively, who can act with focus yet remain unattached, has mastered what most never will, the balance between reason and peace. Thinking less, seeing more is not a rejection of thought, but a refinement of it. It's the art of perceiving reality without the fog of interpretation. The quiet mind doesn't need to prove, it needs to perceive. Once you stop wrestling with every idea, you begin to witness what's real. And in that stillness, life becomes clearer, simpler, and infinitely more alive. The liberation. Acting before the mind is ready. There will never be a perfect moment. The mind will always find one more reason to wait, one more flaw to fix, one more detail to control. That is its nature, to protect, to analyze, to predict. But the longer you wait for certainty, the further you drift from the life that only begins when you move. Growth doesn't wait for readiness. It requires rebellion against hesitation. The freedom you've been chasing in thought exists only in action. Overthinking is the art of postponing life. You imagine movement so vividly that you convince yourself you've already begun. But imagination without action becomes a cage lined with intentions. Andrew Huberman explains that anticipation without execution keeps the brain's stress circuits active. The body prepares for a step that never comes, burning energy while going nowhere. Your biology wants closure, not endless planning, but completion. Each time you act, no matter how small the step, you reset your nervous system and reclaim control of your state.
Jordan Peterson often speaks of responsibility as the antidote to chaos. To act before the mind is ready is to take responsibility for your own evolution. Waiting for motivation is a form of dependency. It keeps your power outside of you. The act itself is what creates momentum, and momentum rewires belief. Each time you move through uncertainty, your brain learns a new truth. I can handle what happens next. That's the seed of resilience, the kind that no amount of analysis can teach. René Descartes sought absolute certainty before declaring truth, but human life doesn't offer that luxury. Action demands faith, not blind belief, but courage rooted in possibility. You will never think your way into confidence. You will only act your way into it. True clarity doesn't precede the leap. It follows it. You realize who you are not through endless reflection, but through movement that exposes both your strength and your limits. Joe Dispenza reminds us that neuroplasticity thrives on novelty. The unfamiliar
is the brain's invitation to grow. The discomfort you feel before taking a step isn't a warning, it's a signal of expansion. The mind calls it fear, the body calls it evolution. Every act you take before you feel ready creates a new pattern of freedom, a new connection between intention and embodiment. You stop thinking about life and start living it. The Stoics understood that peace doesn't come from perfect conditions, but from alignment with action. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be one." Replace arguing with thinking, and the lesson remains timeless. Stop debating what your next move should be. Move, and let movement reveal it. The moment you act before your mind agrees, you reclaim power from fear. Action transforms uncertainty into evidence. It converts theory into strength. You begin to realize that the world doesn't demand perfection, only presence. The courage to take one imperfect step creates more transformation than a lifetime of mental rehearsal. Liberation isn't the absence of fear, it's the refusal to let fear decide your timing. You break the cycle of overthinking, not by silencing thoughts, but by moving through them. You don't wait for the voice in your head to calm down. You act while it trembles. And somewhere in that trembling, courage takes root. Because readiness was never a feeling, it was always a choice. When the mind hesitates, the heart must lead. When doubt speaks, action answers. And when you finally move despite uncertainty, you realize that the freedom you sought through control was waiting in surrender. Peace was never on the other side of clarity. It was on the other side of motion.